7 Johnny Carson guests he secretly despised. Johnny Carson's smile never wavered on camera. For 30 years, America's favorite host welcomed thousands of guests with the same warm chuckle and Midwestern charm. But when the red light went dark, a different Johnny emerged. The minute we cut to commercial, his face would change, revealed a former Tonight Show producer. Johnny would turn to Ed McMahon and whisper something that told you exactly what he really thought about the person sitting 3 feet away. While maintaining a perfect public persona, Carson kept a mental blacklist of guests he considered genuinely intolerable. Not just difficult personalities or demanding stars, these were people who had crossed invisible boundaries that the famously controlled host could never forgive. Most shocking was his decades-long refusal to ever speak to a former protege after what his staff called the betrayal, a grudge so severe that even mentioning her name in Carson's presence would instantly freeze the room. Then there was the Vegas entertainer who confronted Carson with threats so aggressive that the host, a former Navy man never known to back down from confrontation, was genuinely stunned by the intensity of the encounter. Johnny had this special touch to his ear that meant, "Cut to commercial now," revealed a Tonight Show director. "In 30 years, I saw that signal maybe a dozen times, and each time it meant someone had pushed him to his absolute breaking point." Tonight, we reveal the 7 guests who pushed television's most unflappable host past that breaking point, and the private moments that turned professional relationships into personal vendettas that Carson carried to his grave.
I began to retreat very much into myself, and my parents...
Joan Rivers, the unforgivable betrayal. She was his protege until she launched a competing show without telling him, explained a Tonight Show writer who witnessed their relationship collapse. Carson never spoke to her again, not once. The relationship began brilliantly. After Rivers' first appearance in 1965, Carson was immediately taken with her fearless comedy style. Over the next 2 decades, she became his most frequent and reliable guest, eventually earning the coveted position of permanent guest host. Johnny didn't just like Joan professionally, he believed in her, said an NBC executive. He defended her more provocative material to network censors and provided her with a platform that built her career. When she guest hosted, he'd call the next day to check ratings and give feedback. He invested in her success in ways he rarely did with others. This deep professional investment made Rivers' decision in 1986 to accept a competing late-night show on Fox without discussing it with Carson, first devastating on both professional and personal levels. The final blow? Carson learned about it from a Fox press release rather than from Rivers herself. He told NBC, "Don't ever mention her name in my presence," revealed a producer who witnessed the aftermath. It wasn't delivered as an emotional outburst. It was a cold, quiet statement of fact. Rivers later claimed she had attempted to call Carson before the announcement, but couldn't reach him. When she finally called after the news broke, Carson refused to take the call, a pattern that would continue for the rest of his life, despite her multiple attempts at reconciliation. She sent letters, made calls, attempted to arrange meetings through mutual friends, confirmed someone with direct knowledge of the situation. He remained unmoved. It was the most absolute cutting of ties I've ever witnessed in show business. Even after his retirement in 1992, when most professional rivalries would have cooled, Carson maintained his silence. At an industry event in the mid-1990s where both were present, Carson simply turned and walked in the opposite direction when an attempted introduction was made. For a man who rarely spoke publicly about his private feelings, the depth of this particular grudge spoke volumes about how personally he took what he viewed as not just competition, but betrayal of trust.
Crosby's brother, Double Crosby. Hit it. 1, 2.
Bob Hope, the legend who stopped listening. Where Rivers' betrayal was sudden and clear, Carson's growing frustration with Bob Hope represented a slower burn. The gradual realization that an entertainment icon he respected had become something quite different from his public image. Carson once said to his head writer, "He doesn't listen, he just plugs," recalled a producer who witnessed the exchange. What bothered Johnny wasn't that Hope promoted his projects. Most guests did that. It was that Hope had stopped engaging in actual conversation. According to staff members, Hope would arrive with pre-written jokes and anecdotes and deliver them regardless of what Carson actually asked. The resulting interviews weren't conversations at all, but parallel monologues. Carson asking thoughtful questions, while Hope recited promotional talking points about his latest NBC special or book release. During one particularly frustrating commercial break, Carson turned to Ed McMahon and muttered, "I could be speaking Mandarin right now and he'd give the same answers." As Hope aged into his 80s, the situation worsened. His hearing began to fail, making genuine exchange nearly impossible, and his reliance on cue cards increased. While Carson maintained perfect professional courtesy on air, his private irritation became increasingly difficult to conceal from his staff. "They shared the couch, but not the respect," noted a stage manager. The audience saw the legendary Bob Hope chatting with his good friend Johnny Carson. What they didn't see was Johnny turning to his producer during breaks with this look of barely contained frustration. What made Hope's appearances particularly challenging was their ceremonial importance to NBC. As one of the network's biggest stars for decades, Hope represented NBC royalty. Carson understood that treating him with anything less than complete respect on air would have been both unprofessional and potentially damaging to important institutional relationships. The resulting disconnect between Carson's public deference and private disdain created one of the most striking examples of his ability to completely separate his personal feelings from his professional performance, a skill that defined his long career but remained invisible to his millions of viewers.
I wanna thank you for walks down Lover's Lane.
Wayne Newton, the Vegas threat that crossed the line. While Hope created professional frustration, Wayne Newton provoked something much more visceral in Carson, a genuine personal animosity stemming from a backstage confrontation that shocked everyone present. The trouble began with Carson's monologue jokes targeting Newton's high-pitched voice and somewhat effeminate stage persona. Throughout the late 1970s and early 1980s, Carson would occasionally drop lines like, "Wayne Newton's voice is so high only dogs can hear his Christmas album." Those jokes were typical Carson fare, noted a writer from that period, similar to jokes he made about Liberace or Tiny Tim. But something about the Newton jokes touched a nerve. The situation came to a head when Newton appeared as a guest in 1981. What viewers saw was a somewhat tense but professional interview. What they didn't see was Newton leaning in during a commercial break to request a private conversation after the show. The temperature in the room dropped about 20 degrees, remembered a stagehand. Everyone on set could feel this sudden tension. After the taping, Newton confronted Carson in his office with an intensity that shocked everyone present. According to multiple witnesses, Newton delivered what amounted to a threat wrapped in Vegas politeness. Wayne basically told Johnny that the jokes about his masculinity needed to stop, immediately and permanently, said an executive familiar with the incident. He reminded Johnny that Las Vegas was his town, and Carson was just a visitor when he performed there. The implication was clear. Newton had the power to make Carson's life difficult. The most alarming moment reportedly came when Newton said something to the effect of, "You wouldn't think I was so feminine if I grabbed you by the throat right now." Johnny later told his producer, "That guy was actually ready to physically attack me over a few jokes," remembered a staff member. He seemed more surprised than afraid, but the encounter fundamentally changed his view of Newton. The aftermath of this confrontation transformed Newton into persona non grata on The Tonight Show. Carson developed what associates described as a visceral dislike that went beyond professional disagreement. Johnny would physically recoil if Newton appeared on TV when he was channel surfing, said a friend who spent time with Carson in his home. He'd immediately change the channel and mutter something like, "There's Vegas, tough guy." The depth of his dislike was remarkable, especially for someone usually so measured.
Impossible. Simply impossible. The idea.
Shelley Winters. The hurricane in human form. Unlike Newton's direct confrontation, Shelley Winters tested Carson's patience through sheer unpredictability. The two-time Academy Award winner approached television interviews like natural disasters approach coastlines, with unstoppable force and zero concern for the resulting damage. Once threw water at another guest on air, remembered a Tonight Show director. Most guests followed Carson's lead and respected the format. Shelley didn't seem to notice there was a format. She was a force of nature who treated The Tonight Show like her personal therapy session. Winters' appearances typically featured rambling stories that veered wildly between topics, physical comedy that involved climbing on furniture, and pointed political statements that clearly made Carson uncomfortable in an era when late-night television largely avoided partisan politics. The breaking point came during a notorious appearance when Winters, discussing a film where she played an aging actress, became increasingly animated and eventually threw a drink at another guest who had made what she perceived as a dismissive comment about older women in Hollywood. Carson allegedly told staff, "No more Shelley, ever," noted a talent coordinator. That incident crossed a line. Johnny could handle her talking over him, but creating that kind of disruptive scene violated his fundamental sense of how guests should behave. What particularly bothered Carson wasn't just Winter's on-camera chaos, but her treatment of staff behind the scenes. According to multiple accounts, she was routinely demeaning to production assistants, makeup artists, and other support personnel. Johnny had a rule, explained an NBC executive. Guests could treat him however they wanted on air. That was part of the job. But treating his staff poorly was unforgivable. When he learned how Winters had spoken to a young female PA, he was livid. That incident earned her a place on his mental blacklist. Despite these tensions, Winters continued to appear on The Tonight Show throughout Carson's tenure, though with decreasing frequency. Her star power and undeniable talent made her too significant to ban outright, but her appearances were carefully managed, scheduled as solo segments rather than panels, and with extra time built in to accommodate her inevitable digressions.
Why do you always do that? Johnny Carson, they know who I am. Don Rickles!
Don Rickles, when the insult king cut too deep. To viewers, Don Rickles and Johnny Carson shared late night's warmest friendship. In reality, their relationship occasionally ventured into genuinely uncomfortable territory when Rickles crossed lines that even Carson found difficult to forgive. They were friends, but Carson never liked being upstaged, observed a writer who worked on the show. Unlike other difficult relationships, with Rickles it was complicated. Johnny genuinely enjoyed his quick wit and fearlessness, but there were moments when Don would hit a nerve and you'd see a flash of something cold in Johnny's eyes. Carson had 3 subjects he considered personally off-limits: his multiple divorces, his children, and his drinking. Unfortunately, these were precisely the areas where Rickles' insult comedy often ventured. During a 1970s appearance, Rickles made pointed comments about Carson's recent divorce settlement and alluded to his heavy drinking. While continuing to smile on camera, Carson turned to Ed McMahon during the commercial break and said, "He's gone too far this time. You could feel the temperature change in the studio," remembered a cameraman. Johnny was still professional, still smiling, but something had shifted. Anyone who knew him well could see he was genuinely angry. The situation reached a critical point when Rickles orchestrated what he intended as a surprise tribute to Carson, but what became closer to an ambush. Without approval, Rickles arranged for embarrassing photos and stories from Carson's past to be displayed during what was supposed to be a standard interview. During the break, Johnny said simply, "That wasn't funny, Don. That was mean," recalled a director. It was one of the few times I ever heard Carson directly criticize a guest to their face. What saved their relationship was Rickles' eventual sincere apology, something Carson rarely accepted from those who crossed him. Their genuine friendship allowed for a reconciliation that would have been impossible with most other guests who ventured into such personal territory. Johnny called him a bulldozer backstage more than once, explained the producer. But he also understood that Don's problem wasn't malice, but poor judgment about where the line between funny and hurtful actually lay. He could forgive poor judgment in someone whose heart he believed was in the right place.
That the less intelligent the performer is, the better he is. For instance, Marlon Brando.
Truman Capote, literary brilliance and substance-fueled chaos. Where Rickles occasionally crossed personal boundaries, Truman Capote created a different dilemma for Carson, a brilliant literary mind whose increasing substance issues turned appearances into unpredictable, potentially liability-creating events. He said he was literary royalty. I say he was just wrecked, observed a Tonight Show writer who witnessed Capote's deterioration across multiple appearances. The terrifying thing was, everyone knew he actually did have dirt on Hollywood stars and Washington politicians. When he started naming names and describing what he'd seen at private events, there was genuine panic about what he might reveal next. Capote's status as confidant to the elite made his increasingly uninhibited comments particularly risky. As his struggles with alcohol and drugs worsened, his minimal social filters disappeared entirely, resulting in interviews that lurched between literary insight and scandalous revelations. Carson was furious and cut him off mid-taping, revealed a producer who witnessed a particularly chaotic appearance. There was one segment where Capote started describing in explicit detail a sexual encounter involving a prominent political couple. Johnny let him go for about 30 seconds before realizing we were heading into potentially actionable territory. As Capote's condition deteriorated, Carson faced an ethical dilemma. Continue booking a literary giant who could occasionally still display flashes of his former brilliance, or stop featuring someone whose impairment was becoming increasingly obvious and potentially exploitative to showcase. After a particularly difficult appearance where Capote was barely coherent, Carson told his producer, "We're not doing this anymore. It's not good for him, and it's not good television," recalled a talent coordinator. It was a rare instance of Johnny making a booking decision based partly on concern for a guest rather than purely on entertainment value. What made the Capote situation particularly poignant was watching the gradual decline of genuine genius. Unlike merely difficult personalities, Capote represented real talent being consumed by self-destruction, a tragedy playing out in front of the cameras that Carson ultimately decided he could no longer showcase, regardless of the compelling television it sometimes created.
I don't know, I never thought about doing one, but
Yeah.
I figured if I was gonna present myself as a virgin to anyone, it should be you.
Madonna, the calculated provocateur. Unlike the aging legends who earned Carson's private disapproval, Madonna represented something entirely different, a young cultural force deliberately challenging the conventions Carson had spent decades maintaining. Her first appearance was loaded with sex jokes, bleeped lines, and smug jabs, remembered a production assistant from her 1987 appearance. Carson laughed politely and never invited her back. Unlike guests whose behavior reflected personal problems or professional decline, Madonna's boundary pushing was entirely strategic, a carefully constructed persona designed to challenge the established norms that Carson's show represented. She wasn't just pushing boundaries, she kicked the door down, observed a music journalist who covered Madonna's career. Everything from her outfit choice to her provocative language was calculated to create a moment that would generate next-day headlines. This approach created fascinating television as Carson, always the consummate professional, attempted to maintain control while Madonna deliberately threw obstacles in his path. Where Johnny typically established rapport through charm, Madonna maintained a combative edge, challenging his questions and making explicitly sexual references that left him momentarily speechless. There was this moment where he asked an innocent question about her tour, and she responded with a double entendre so blatant that Carson actually blushed, recalled the production assistant. The audience gasped, then roared. You could see Madonna mentally checking a box, mission accomplished. Behind the scenes, her appearance created chaos for NBC's standards department. Her deliberately provocative language forced real-time decisions about what could air, resulting in several noticeable bleeps that themselves became part of the interview's controversy. The standards team was hitting the delay button so often it became almost comical, which was exactly what Madonna intended, revealed a former NBC executive. Each bleep just emphasized what she was doing, turning the censorship itself into part of her performance. For Carson, a man who had started his career in the 1950s, Madonna represented something fundamentally at odds with his understanding of entertainment, a prioritization of provocation over connection. While he maintained perfect professional composure throughout their encounter, those close to him reported he found the experience deliberately manipulative and contrary to what he believed a talk show appearance should be. The generational gap couldn't have been clearer. Carson came from an era where entertainers sought to charm. Madonna came from a generation that believed challenging the audience could be equally valid. It wasn't personal dislike so much as a fundamental disagreement about the purpose of television itself. Carson's genius wasn't just his skill as a performer, but his ability to maintain complete separation between his private feelings and his public persona. Even with guests he secretly despised, viewers never saw a flicker of the genuine antipathy he felt. That absolute professionalism, the commitment to the audience's experience above his own comfort, defined his legacy. What bound these 7 difficult relationships together wasn't just that they tested Carson's legendary patience. Each crossed a different boundary that revealed something essential about the man behind the desk. Joan Rivers violated his core value of loyalty. Wayne Newton threatened him physically. Shelley Winters created chaos that affected others. Bob Hope treated the show as merely a promotional vehicle. Truman Capote's substance issues created ethical dilemmas. Don Rickles occasionally ventured into truly personal territory. Madonna deliberately challenged the format itself. In today's world of social media feuds and public call-outs, Carson's approach seems almost from another era. a time when private grudges remained private, when entertaining the audience took precedence over airing personal grievances. That standard, like Carson himself, increasingly belongs to another age of entertainment, one where the greatest professionals were those who never let you see what they were really thinking, even when the cameras stopped rolling. If you enjoyed this glimpse behind the television curtain, please like this video and subscribe for more revelations from Hollywood's golden age. Let us know in the comments which of these Carson feuds surprised you most, or which classic television personalities you'd like us to explore next.